Knowledge unknown is the blessing. Common office to ask questions like share, leave suggestions. Power to my people is the message. We've been here before it started. No doubt we the hardest. In remembrance of those departed, we are keeping our swords. The sharpest class with skill. Class with skill. Class with skill.
Class is in session. Today we step into one of the most controversial interpretive frameworks in modern history. Not just religion, not just race, identity. The foundation begins in the book of Deuteronomy 28. Most people read the blessings, few study the curses, but the entire framework hangs on one verse, Deuteronomy 28:46. And they shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever. A sign identifies. A sign marks a people across generations. So under the interpretive framework, the curses were not only punishments, they became identifying conditions. Now look at the conditions. Verse 32, thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people. Black American history. Children sold, families broken, generations shattered through slavery. Verse 33, the fruit of thy land and all thy labors shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up. Who worked the plantations? Who built wealth they could not own? Verses 43 to 44, he shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. Economic dependence, redlining, wealth denial, generational instability. Verse 64, and the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, the African diaspora, America, Caribbean, South America, Europe, a scattered people. Then the verse that anchors the framework, Deuteronomy 28:68, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. Interpretive reading, Egypt represents bondage, ships represent captivity, sold into slavery, and what people experienced all three together through the transatlantic slave trade, Black Americans. Now critics say other people suffered too. True, but the framework is not built on one curse. It is built on the entire cluster. Ships, slavery, scattering, oppression, fear, economic dependence, family destruction, identity loss. And the interpretive claim says, no modern people match the total pattern more closely. Your tuition is due. Like, share, subscribe, put some $ in the comments. All right, now, back to class. Class is back in session. Now let's deal with appearance, because history handed the world a European image of biblical people. Tall skin, straight hair, Renaissance features. But scripture paints something more complicated. In Acts of the Apostles 13:1, scripture says, Simeon that was called Niger. Niger means black, dark, and Simeon carries a Hebrew Israelite name. So the interpretive argument says, here is an Israelite associated man identified by dark appearance. Then we move to the book of Revelation 1:14 to 15. His head and his hairs were white like wool. Interpretive reading, wool suggests textured hair. White describes the color. Then his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace. Bronze burned in fire. Darkened, refined, deep toned. Now critics say that's symbolic imagery. And yes, Revelation is visionary language, but symbols still use recognizable imagery. Then add Lamentation 5:10. Our skin was black like an oven because of the terrible famine. In context, it describes suffering during famine, but it also shows biblical writers naturally use darker physical imagery when describing themselves. Then remember another major fact. The Israelites lived in ancient Egypt for generations. Egypt was in Africa. The biblical world was deeply connected through Africa, the Levant. Afro-Asiatic civilizations. Then in Book of Revelation 4:1-3, John describes heavenly glory using jasper, sardius stones, emerald radiance, fire-like imagery. The interpretive argument says Revelation consistently uses rich, radiant imagery, not pale European portrait language. And within the framework, this challenges the later Europeanized image of biblical figures. Class dismissed. Give me a like if you're paying attention. Comment any questions back to class. Class is in session. Now we ask the hardest question. How would Israelites become Black Americans? The framework says Israel was scattered after conquest, especially after the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Jerusalem destroyed, Israelites dispersed into surrounding regions. Jewish communities existed in Egypt, Cyrene, and Ethiopia. In the New Testament itself, Africans appear in the early church: Simeon, Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, and the Ethiopian eunuch. Trade routes connected North Africa, East Africa, and West Africa. Then enters Babylon to Timbuktu. The book argues Israelites migrated deeper into Africa after conquest and dispersion. The framework points toward Mali, Songhai, and Timbuktu. Now, historically, mainstream scholarship does not confirm a mass Israelite migration into West Africa, but within the interpretive framework, fragments of Israelite customs and identities survived there. Then came slavery. The transatlantic slave trade erased names, broke tribes apart, destroyed language continuity, separated families, and mixed populations together. Now critics ask, where are the records? But the framework answers, a scattered covenant people in captivity would not preserve clean records. That is the point of the curses. The framework says, God marked the people through conditions, not through paperwork, not through uninterrupted genealogy, through oppression, captivity, scattering, and survival. Then add, Olaudah Equiano observed similarities between Igbo customs and the Jews, circumcision, purification customs, and cultural parallels. Some African groups preserve traditions resembling ancient Hebrew practices. So the framework concludes, fragments of Israelite identity survived in Africa before slavery shattered continuity. Class dismissed. Quick intermission. If you're rocking with Class with Skeul, make sure you like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Drop a fist in the comments if you're still final session. The framework says the people would not only suffer, they would eventually begin searching for their identity again. That's where Book of Deuteronomy 4:27-31 enters. Verse 27, and the Lord shall scatter you among the nations. Verse 28, and there ye shall serve gods, the work of men's hands. Interpretive meaning, forced assimilation, identity loss, and separation from covenant memory. Then verse 29, but if from thence thou shalt seek the Lord thy God, thou shalt find him. The framework says the awakening comes after the scattering. Then verse 30, when thou art in tribulation, and all these things are come upon thee, all these things, slavery, fear, oppression, captivity, and identity destruction. Then verse 31, for the Lord thy God is a merciful God. He will not forsake thee. That becomes the antidote, not hatred, not revenge, not chaos, restoration, discipline, knowledge, identity, purpose, turning back to God. And that is why books like Babylon to Timbuktu became so influential, because they asked, who were we before slavery? And within the interpretive framework, the answer becomes a scattered covenant, people trying to remember who they are. The central argument becomes the loss of records is exactly what you would expect from a scattered covenant people marked by the curses. So the interpretive conclusion says, Black Americans are viewed within this framework as the strongest modern candidates for the people described under the covenant curses, not because of one verse, not because of one image, but because of the signs, the scattering, the suffering, the survival, and the search for identity after generations of captivity. And whether people agree with the interpretation or not, one thing remains undeniable. A people disconnected from their history will always search for who they are. And according to this framework, the awakening begins when the scattered remember. Class dismissed.